the beginning, it should not be about income streams. At the beginning, it should be for you to find what else you can sell to the market outside of full-time engagement. Like, how else can you find demand for your expertise? And then you can test into monetization strategy with it. But don't think about it like I have to close it at the highest rate, or I have to like make a meaningful stream out of it at the beginning. When you're holding your full-time role, that is where your money for rent, for food are coming from. This should be more of prototyping first. Close your first couple of agreements, maybe have one that is even free at first, that like you're just prototyping the value delivery, then close it at just your regular full-time rate, just to test into it, and then start increasing rates.
Get ready for the ProducTea with Leah, your fun-sized dose of business, tech, growth, and product chatter. I'm your host, Leah, and it's time to spill the tea. Welcome to the ProducTea with Leah, where we put water into our plants with growth gossip. Today, I'm hosting a special guest for the second time, a woman who's a one-person Avengers team for B2B SaaS companies without a cape and without the drama. The woman that keeps nagging me, Leah, when can I come back to your podcast? At least once a year. And she's been a game changer for companies like Miro, Amplitude, MongoDB, SurveyMonkey, and many, many more, all while running the ultimate startup, Parenthood. When she's not deadlifting the equivalent of a baby elephant or chasing after her soccer stars, you'll find her building courses to help us lift our own growth weights at Reforge. So tighten your weightlifting belts for the solopreneur superwoman, the SaaS savior, the CrossFit queen, my dear friend, Elena Verna.
That was an amazing introduction. Thank you. Thank you for having me again, Leah.
Good morning, Elena. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a splendid morning.
Oh, amazing. How would you rate this introduction from 0 to full deadlift?
Full deadlift? That would be like a complex with the deadlift and then the clean and then a push jerk overhead. So that was amazing.
I did not understand 70% of that sentence, but I'm very glad that we actually went into this. Did you notice that I put a baby elephant into this introduction? And there's a reason for this.
I did. I deadlift a baby elephant. How much do they weigh?
It's exactly as much as you can actually deadlift. So
That's
you put this
amazing.
Conveniently. Yeah. So I did some research and Elena actually put on LinkedIn how much she can deadlift. So I figured out how much a baby elephant is and it just matches up. So here you go.
That's a good knowledge to have in life. If I ever find myself in the situation that I need to pick up a baby elephant, I can do it. That's a very important knowledge for me to possess.
If Leah is ever under a baby elephant, you're going to rescue me.
I will. I can rescue you. Exactly. I can and I will.
All right. What's been going on with you in the past 6 months? We haven't spoken since then. So what's happening?
I've stopped my interim with Amplitude. Not that I stopped, it was just a year contract, and the year contract came to an end. And I've been back advising. I signed a couple new clients. I'm very excited to work with a few of them and solve their growth problems. And I'm potentially exploring doing another interim later this year. So we'll see if that's going to happen.
That is absolutely amazing. When I'm grown up, when I'm actually fully grown up, then I also want to, if Miro, Amplitude, or anyone else is listening, Leah is time, right? Like I need to catch up. I need to catch up to you. So what are we going to talk today about? We're going to talk about how to be a growth consultant. Now, we both are in some ways. I think you are kind of a full-time consultant. I'm a consultant at the side next to my full-time kind of job. What is being a growth consultant about? Is it about making a lot of money, or what is this about? Can we maybe do an introduction on this?
Yes, you can call it many ways. Growth consultant. I actually don't call myself consultant. I call myself an advisor. But at the end of the day, because growth advising is just one of my streams where I monetize my expertise, I've kind of evolved to call myself more of a solopreneur because I have multiple streams that are monetizable, advising being one of them. And whenever you have multiple SKUs, so to speak, that you're able to sell to the market, it's more of a solopreneur, as long as you're just you, yourself, and I, and your brain is your product, and you build a business model around it with multiple plans that you can sell to monetize your expertise. So yeah, I think I've found myself here. I can't say that if you asked me 5 years ago or even 10 years ago that, oh, what do you want to be in 5 to 10 years? And I would have said solopreneur, growth advisor. That's never been my end destination goal, but we've kind of evolved into becoming that, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
So, what would you say is the main advantage? If you had to just like, why would someone do this aside from obviously making a boatload of cash? What is the main reason for doing this, in your estimation?
So, one of the main ways that people monetize their skills and talents on the market is by holding full time positions. And full time positions are fairly uniform across the board. There is either individual or more of the leadership type roles where you're either a player as an individual contributor or you're more of a coach as a leader. But all of the full time roles assume that you work for a company that is trying to extract some value out of you. They're also assumed that you're going to be more of a generalist, not a specialist, because you are hired to hold a seat at the company and they just throw problems at you and it's your job to figure out how to solve them. Whether they fit your superpowers or don't fit your superpowers is not really company's concern, because they're just meant to extract as much out of you and make as much revenue per your salary as possible. And then they really don't care about you as much. You are just a blip in their history, no matter how impactful or how important you were. Yet the company completely defines you. It's your brand, it's what validates your expertise. And the question here really becomes is, do you enjoy having a full-time position? Do you enjoy having that level of generalization? Do you enjoy working for somebody and benefiting somebody and just in the sideways benefiting yourself? Or is that not for you? And for me, personally, at the beginning of my career, I wouldn't have done it any other way but hold a full-time position. I think it was an incredible learning experience. It was accelerated path towards me understanding how business works, how market works, how customers make purchasing decisions and just decisions around the product. So it was a really great learning slope. However, when I got to leadership level roles, I found myself wanting more because I actually felt like my learning curve has slowed down quite a bit. I've learned a lot of the tactics and I learned the people management and I learned the strategy setting for the company. And then I found myself a lot in mundane operational tasks like holding meetings, presenting at the meetings, writing memos, doing hiring, doing people management, P&L management, forecast updates. And some people love those tasks. But to me, I looked at it and it left me longing more. It left me feeling like the grass is always greener on the other side, like I should be constantly looking for a new opportunity that has better learning curve, that has better culture, that has better position, that would better suit me. And at the end of the day, I found personally that it was impossible for me to interview. I suck at interviewing. Whenever I go into the interview, I for some reason ignore all of the red flags. I get married to the problem. I get excited by my opportunity to potentially solve that problem. And I just go into it very naively. And by the way, the process of interviewing, it's not like there's a lot of truth that is being told on either side. The company is very much incentivized to just recruit you. So everything is rainbows and unicorns and butterflies. And as a candidate, you try to sell yourself too. And nobody talks about really issues that exist in the current workflow that you can help each other solve. And they only talk about opportunities. And those are exciting. And I get to attached to them. And I just found myself not be able to even make a decision on how to pick a next business that I can be successful for a long term. And that was my first wedge into consulting world, is that I wasn't really happy with my day-to-day tasks that I had as an operator, full-time operator in the long term. And I had a really hard time figuring out how to pick the position where I might have a better experience.
I think you're touching on a couple of interesting bits here. It is interesting that it's not really advising versus full-time roles. I think that would be oversimplified. Also, like if I listen to you, and also, I mean, I have my own kind of vision of how this should be. And I think you're touching on a very important subject. So first of all, you said that there's kind of like a table stake into being a good consultant. And it means that you need to have this operational experience done in some way. You need to have had worked on the ground on specific problems, because otherwise it's going to be very hard for you to do any pattern matching for whatever the company is looking for. I mean,
Right.
I think that's on the side of like what you have to kind of deliver. The other thing that I feel like, and I would love to talk about this a little bit because you talked about incentivization. And I think that's the core problem of when we are presenting ourselves to someone that gives us a job, specifically in the market environment that we have right now. A lot of people cannot afford to not get a job. So they're not
Right.
pushing back and they're not critical in terms of like, hey, what is this company actually about? And the company
Right.
probably does the same from the other side. So the optionality of having multiple income streams for me is always good, because if I see that a candidate has something like this, even if it's just a side business, it does not need
Mm.
to be a full consulting gig, then I know that they're actually here because they want to. It's another sign of, okay, there's more passion behind this, like because they really want to work with me rather than it's just a numbers game. And I think that de-risking of this kind of relationship is very, very valuable. And I don't see it as a downside. It's actually an upside.
You don't see it as a downside. I have seen companies that do see it as a downside, and they ask candidates to shut down their other gigs in order to join the company. So I think there's exceptions to be made, and it's becoming more common in the market, but I wouldn't say that it's very widely accepted, especially in more traditional industries.
I would say this is coming from probably the side of, okay, let's see where this goes. If you control kind of people by the amount of hours that they work and not on outcomes in terms of like, okay, we want to move the needle
Fair.
towards for our customers or whatever, then the danger of you trying to enforce this because you're like, oh, Leah is not working 10 hours from 9 to 7 in the evening on this particular project, this becomes a real danger, right? Like this is an actual problem. And I think I'm just going to anger now everybody who's working in Europe because this is just more predominant over here still. This is an old structure of organization building and like how to try to get control over people in some ways. And I understand if you're coming from this kind of angle that you're also more, how do you say, skeptical towards working from home cultures. There's also a sentiment that I've seen being creeping up, right? Because people cannot control anymore. And one of the most depressing studies that I read about this yesterday was that there's a 65% increase in the market for employer control software where they can see whether their employees are actually working. So that is an actual market that exists and it is growing. And I feel like while this is a bit of a stretch, but like if you're a good consultant, if you're a good advisor, if you have optionality in your career, then you know what it is about, right? It is about delivering something that is meaningful and also maybe, hopefully, also measurable.
Yes, but probably a lot of your mindset has came from you also advising and consulting other companies and seeing how it benefited you as a person. So you accept it and you want to see it in other people as well. Somebody who has never experienced any career optionality and has only been in this well-defined box of full-time employment, 40 hours a week engagement with the company or more if you're salaried and there's just expectations to be around the clock on, then they don't see the value. But there is this new school of thought that I am glad to see spreading a lot heavily, because a lot of leaders now do have advising contracts on the side and they hold other board positions. So they see the value of engaging with other companies as well. So it is shifting. So the tides are turning in employees' favor, which is great. I do think that tide is going fairly slow, and a lot of people have to tread carefully with their current employers in order to do this right that actually aids them and doesn't work against them. But advising, consulting, if you can do it even as a side gig to your full-time position, will make you such much better operator. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. They actually think that, hey, looking at it as monetization stream. No, it helps you pull out of the weeds. It helps you see and be strategic with another company. That helps you be more strategic in your current role. It helps you understand what is actually a pattern versus what is a data point that is not replicatable. So it creates a huge career accelerant and learning accelerant, in my opinion. And if more people embrace it and actually take advantage of it, because more and more companies are willing to employ people in different ways too. There's not just the full-time. They're open to have advisors because advising is seen to be successful for a lot of really great companies that have really scaled that growth slope really quickly because they had advisors and they had access to that expertise. And I can talk about me hiring advisors too. I'm an advisor, but when I take on a full-time role, I hire advisors for myself because I don't know everything. And if I can get access to a piece of somebody's expertise that I don't need full-time access right now, but just an hour a week can do absolutely magical transformation on your team's thinking and the trajectory of your outcome.
Yeah, it is very concentrated. And what I find extremely interesting is if you are booked for an hour, and this is not the case for every consulting mandate, but if you're booked for an hour every week, you get a concentrated, filtered problem kind of dish on what's wrong with the company without all these processes that you mentioned before, like all the stand-ups, all the
Yeah.
PRDs, all the other garbage that you have to just do that you don't want to do and so forth. And I'm looking at this as almost like a triangle. So now we're both producing a lot of content. Mine is not that good lately because I'm focusing on the full-time role, but it is essentially, it's like a triangle, right? So like I have the full-time role, I have the content, and then I have also on the side the advising stuff. And all of these three things are actually feeding into each other.
Yep.
Whenever I write something down, it is usually because something very specific happened somewhere that I'm thinking over. Either I made a mistake or something that really worked really well. And then once you have this written down, what do you think I'm going to do when I go into a new company as a full-time employer? I'm bringing all of this in. This was extremely helpful for me because
Yep.
people could actually read, where did my knowledge come from? So this kind of cycle, this works really, really well. And I also want to reiterate that this is extremely helpful for people who love learning like we do. And I think that alone that's a reason already to kind of do it. Even if you do not get paid, I would even go that far, even if you do not get paid, because that's how I started.
I think everybody starts that way at very beginning in the first couple of conversations that you have. You can't monetize something that you don't know what you're monetizing first. So you go with
Yeah.
freemium and then you start pulling monetization strings. But monetization is an outcome of successful fit within advising or consulting world or even content. At the end of the day, it's not a starting point.
Okay. So let's say someone is listening to this and says, like, I want to do what they do. How do I get my first contract? Let's rewind the clock a little bit. How would you approach this if you did not have 500 million followers? I think we have a very specific path on where we also are now publicly exposed much more with followers and so forth. But like, how would you approach this now if you had to start new?
Right. So everything I do on LinkedIn and Substack, that has been really last year and a half. I've been doing this as a solopreneur for the last 4 years, but my first advising contract I signed 10 years ago. So this has been a fairly slow burn for me. So it's not like I just woke up one day and said, I'm going to leave it all behind and leap forward. No, this has been a very slow evolution. And I didn't even know that I was coming here where I am right now. It's just as I was moving along, that just seemed like a logical next step and something that I should escalate into. But let's talk about that first contract. First of all, I'm sure you have at least some recruiting outreaches that are happening towards you, let's say on LinkedIn, over email, maybe some agencies reaching out to you. And a lot of times you should explore them for potentially switching position. A lot of times you should not, because your current role is much better for you. But don't waste those opportunities. That would be my first recommendation. It's a window of potentially exploring if there is an alternative way that you can engage with the company, because they're clearly seeking somebody with your expertise. So what I would do is I would take a call. I would take a call to try to understand what is the problem that they're solving. And that problem, you are an expert, by the way. You have a lot more room to define the engagement than you give yourself credit. You don't have to follow their path. You can understand the problem and you can actually depict whether they need somebody full time, because a lot of times they don't, because it's still a hypothesis. It's still very early, and they would benefit from somebody just either doing a project base to validate the hypotheses, to consult somebody internally who can just execute, or to help them even just better define a problem statement in the first place because they're not defining it correctly. And you can offer those services back to the company. Now, a lot of times it's just like they need a full-time position, and you shouldn't try to convert that full-time position into a consulting or advising contract. That's not really scalable. But if you see an opportunity that there is other way to engage with a company that can be widely beneficial for the business and you, because you can do it side by side with your existing full-time engagement, you should go after it. My first consulting agreement was with a very small company where I literally was running queries and cohorts on their database, trying to help them understand their retention rates because they did not know how to do it. And they were trying to hire a full-time analyst. And I'm like, you don't need full-time analysts. You literally need somebody to spend 10 hours on this, run some queries, help you answer these questions. And then you should get you going for another 6 months. Like, don't waste your money on it. And I offered myself with that and I got paid for it. It was very much a player mode contract, and it helped me. Like, I saw their data and I learned a bunch from it, and I had a bunch of questions. They answered all of it. It was like incredible 3-month project. And I really liked because I went through actual contract stage and I've learned a lot what to do and what not to do. I went through the payment. I, by the way, charged less than I was making full time per hour for that because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just want to recuperate some of my
Yeah.
time here. This is a very cheap rate. I have my SurveyMonkey job and I was super happy with it, but I will do this for you for a couple $100 because I just want to do something extra. And that will be exciting for me to get access to a brand new database. At that point, it was like a cherry on top of the ice cream. So it was great. And that materialized into the next time somebody reached out to me, I said, oh, but I can just give you advice. And I was just engaging with them for free because I didn't know what it's like to give an advice because all I knew was how to do actually player role or manager role at the company. And then that slowly escalated to me starting to do more public engagements because I'm like, oh, I'm giving this advice. What if I do it more publicly? There is knowledge that I have that other people are seeking for. And then I started getting approached after my talks of, hey, can you maybe help us a little bit more? This is how I met Miro, by the way. I spoke at the Growth Marketing Conference in San Francisco, and CEO approached me afterwards and he said, I love what you said. Can you chat with us? This is when they were super small. I don't know, they had maybe $1 million in AR and a couple dozen people working for them. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Let's dig in and let's see how I can help. And he was really wanting to access my background, my patterns, and my observations. And that's what I had to sell at that moment. It wasn't like any industry insights. It wasn't anything else. And it was valuable for them to get access to somebody who has seen the company grow to first $100 million in ARR. And that materialized in me not only advising for them for 5 years on one-off basis, where it was very casual to me signing my first contract that I went solopreneur on was with Miro because I reached back out to them and said, hey, I'm going to do this more full time. And they're like, yes, let's sign a retainer agreement. And then it materialized in me taking their CMO position for a year as an interim, which was a fantastic run as well. So these things kind of snowball on their own, but you do need to put yourself out there and you need to prototype yourself in different positions, so to speak.
That is in many aspects also what it was for me. I would only add one thing to this in the sense that the amount of time that it takes for these seeds to grow is longer than you assume. And it takes very, very long before they start to spread. But then sometimes they just, sometimes they just grow within days, right? And then you have a couple of things that are coming in all at the same time. Sometimes it can take years. And I think it's very interesting that the way that I'm looking at this, it's almost like salvaging, for instance, when a recruiter talks to you and you go into a really interesting talk with someone. So, for instance, for me as well, Miro tried to recruit me for a director position as for the whiteboard. And I remember talking to Varun Pamar about this 2 times. And I kind of knew already that it's not coming together. And I almost wrestled a strategic partnership out of this entire talk. But the point is, when you let people know where you also have a good impression with them, right?
Right.
That you are doing something afterwards that is also maybe right now it's not a fit, these people always come around. I had one particularly excellent candidate 2 years ago at Small PDF that did not want to come to us. And I have tried to approach him 4 times on different projects long after outside of Small PDF just because I remembered him so vividly. And it definitely does help if you start to seed yourself, if you do not expect something immediately also at the same time. And as you said, like you put yourself out there. One of my first talks that I put out there was about how we scaled Small PDF from, 20 to 50 people back then or something. And I scored 2 advising contracts out of this. I never did paid advising back then. but it took like 6 months. And both of these contracts came in from something that had like 250 views. And this really goes to show like how effective this kind of is. Like you have to put yourself out there. And I didn't like this. I did not like it because of my imposter syndrome, but you kind of have to do it. And if you cannot do it for paid, then do it for free. There's a lot of platforms that allow you to do this.
Right. I think at the beginning, you can capitalize on just existing inbound
Yeah.
that you're getting. It might not be frequent. It doesn't matter. It will come around at some point that you will be able to identify opportunity. You can increase that inbound by doing public speaking or really ungating your knowledge. It doesn't have to be in a speaking format. It can be just in a written format as well. And the more you ungate your knowledge, it's kind of funny. We're almost programmed to do pay to play. So like, hey, recruit me, sign me, and then I'll give you all of my
Yeah.
knowledge. Versus this is kind of changing that way of thinking and say, hey, I'm going to ungate all of my knowledge. And then what you're going to pay for is helping you operationalize that knowledge, because operational and local implementation is highly nuanced than just like an overall framework and the knowledge and like the examples. And
Yeah.
that's what my skill set is. And if you actually switch the monetization and operationalizing and then you ungate everything else, it not only increases your inbound for full-time positions too, so it's going to be helpful regardless, but it will create more options for you to engage with companies in other ways.
It is kind of product-led growth all over again.
It
But
is.
I know the proof in this is that every message that ever has led to a paid engagement with me has started in some way or form with the sentence, "Hey Leah, I've been reading your content for quite a while
Right.
now," and then something else comes afterwards. And that is extremely flattering in some way because I know that they know what I'm about very well. I don't need to explain anymore. Can I do this? I don't need to sell myself in terms of my skills. It's only about pricing in many aspects, or like whether we can get together because of my availability or whatever. But like the kind of the value proof of is she skilled enough is kind of already done to the most part.
It does the
And
qualification, right?
yeah,
At
and
the
that's
end of the
great.
day, it's kind of like auto
Yeah.
qualification that only people that reach out to you are already experiencing the problem that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, that is very true. Okay, so then let's maybe really quickly talk about the different forms. So I can just really quickly talk about what I do, and then you can nicely say, like, maybe what you do and what the difference is. So, what I do is very simple. I do full time. I hope everybody knows what a full time job is. And then on the other side, I also do a retainer consulting or advisory, which is limited to 4 hours a month. And those are prepaid 4 hour screen time with some additional async time on top, and I limit myself to two of those. So full time retainer. And the difference for the retainer business side for me is that I'm not doing exactly what I do on my full time role. And just like with less time, that's not what I'm doing. As a consultant and advisor, I have to completely deliver a new value. I really have to condense down what matters to the business. I'm not going to get holed up by processes. Sometimes I could just react to something like an hour before the actual meeting because something is burning down again. And I think as a head of product that is consulting, you're not doing the same as the full time head of product in the company where I'm at, which is at Jua right now. And that is quite important. You're not expected as a consultant or as an advisor to do the same. Maybe you can also touch on this because I think for yourself, it's more about interim.
Yep.
I don't know whether you do fractional at all, but like interim, fractional, and also retainer.
Yeah. So let's talk about different modes of engagement. There is contractual work per project that you can engage with the company. Let's say they need to, I don't know, they need to launch their first email lifecycle. You're going to go and you're going to implement it all out. And it's going to be like a 3 to 6 month engagement, more of like a project base. And you're really playing a player role in it. You're doing actual work, but it's a specific to a project. You're not just an employee like a kitchen sink that everybody throws questions and additional work on. You are very focused on one deliverable. Then there's more of advising work. In advising work, you're more of a coach. You're not a player. In all of my advising contracts, I don't do any of the operational work in it. I coach operators to try to really unload as much of my expertise into them, almost like building a succession plan for myself onto them. And and they do all of the player mode work, and I advise them to help them see blind corners. I help them understand the patterns and to increase their chances of success. Now, when I'm advising, I also don't want to be a kitchen sink advisor that you just retain me and then all of the questions go my way. No, I want to make sure that what I'm advising, you're able to see an impact because my livelihood depends on it. My word of mouth loops depends on it. So I pick a lane and I'm very cognizant of picking something that I have a deep expertise in, and then two, that they are resourced to execute against. And then three, that it's a high strategic company priority. So they are going to put resources and time into it. And that lane for me, because I do mostly growth advising, it has to be focused either on activation or monetization or product-led sales or acquisition. But I have them make a choice. I'm not just going to have a open hour, like office hours, where everybody can go ask a question. No, we have an initiative. We're going to set a strategy. I'm going to help you with every single implementation detail and tactical support. And then we're going to go back up and go back down and go back up and go back down until we see the output and outcome that we want out of that initiative. So I do want to see impact of my work too. So I don't do very general contracts because of that. And that's an advisor. I'm more in the coach mode of the player on the inside of the company. Advising contracts for me, because I am full-time advisor, I hold as many as 7 or 8 at a time. The reason for that is not the time constraint, but it's actually cost of switching constraint, because in every single contract, it's different industry slightly, different customers slightly, different product slightly, and different team internally. So switching across all of those variables is actually very heavy on your brain computational power. So I just know that I cannot constantly think of more than 7 problems at a time. I get diminishing returns and I start like being more skim level as opposed to be able to understand the problem very deeply. So it's just a constraint on me. And I haven't really seen anybody when they have like these more involved advisory to have more than 7 to 10, just because it gets really heavy on your ability to actually drill into the details. But I also do retainers. That sounds familiar. It's because I need to control my time spent with the client. I do let them go over it, at least at the beginning during the onboarding period, but they pre-purchase number of hours with me. And I require for me to meet with them every single week. Because if it's less than a week, companies move really quickly. And if I meet with them only once a month, so many things has happened that we have to spend half the meeting them just catching me up as to what's going on. And then that leaves very little time to actually discuss the problems go forward, or I have to stay on the very theoretical level and I cannot help them really adopt any of the frameworks. So I try to meet weekly just so I can stay on top of what's going on. So we minimize the catch-up time and I'm more embedded into the workflow of the company. Now, that's advising. Then there's more full-time-ish engagements. So interim, I've had 3 interim engagements at this point with Miro, with Netlify, with Amplitude, and I might have 1 more left in my tank to do. But interims are full-time positions, but they're short tenure. So you signed for 6 months or for 12 months, I will be your full-time employee. I manage teams, I hold OKRs, I'm in board meetings, I'm in leadership meetings, I'm doing all of the one-on-ones. So I am a full-time employee, but it's short-term. It's decided between me and the company that I will be out in the next year. So there's a difference between taking a full-time position that assumes long engagement and then leaving in a year. Market penalizes you for that. But if you take an interim, which is it's pre-assumed that it's only gonna last a year, market rewards you for that. It's really funny the change in psychology just in those two, but it does really work. And then fractional is something I don't do, although I know a lot of people that do it. And fractional is part-time in longevity. So take it like a fractional is more usually leadership level roles, but you are part-time employee, but there is no end in sight usually to that contract. So interim is full-time short-term, fractional is part-time long-term.
It's interesting that you said what is kind of acceptable, like in a CV, because I was always worried about my CV. Like, how does a position look like if you've only been there for like 4 to 5 months, for instance, right? So, like, you go into a company and the company sold like 5 months after.
Mhm.
You can write into that position what you want, like that the exit happened
Yes.
and so forth. But it's like, oh, okay, you've just spent 5 months there. What did you do wrong that they kicked you
Right.
out? And let's just attach some kind of time frame. I'm going to give you mine that I think are just quite optimal for the retainers, for instance. So for the retainers, I think we talked about this as well at some point. I think a minimum that is really good is usually 6 months, because then we see whether we had some impact in the company, first of all.
Yes.
But they should not take longer than a year, maybe. This is roughly the kind of the optimal time frame there in my mind. Are you also somewhere there for the retainers?
So to me, minimum is 6 months too, because I see is it a failure point if I only engage with company for 3 months or less as an advisor,
Mm,
because first 3 months I'm spewing just a lot of theoretical knowledge, but there's not that much full implementation that is happening, maybe just some early stages of, versus in 6 months, you're actually starting to see the output. It also depends on the work. Like if we're standing up a new growth loop, it's a year to truly see the impact if it actually starts working in the system. So if it's more of an innovation work, I require a year. If it's an optimization work, it can be 6 months. My best engagements, however, have been multi-year. So with MongoDB, I was there as an advisor for over 3 years, and it was fantastic because I saw so many different stages of them going through
yeah.
and helping them along the way. With Crisp, I was almost 2 years with them, and I really enjoyed seeing that evolution through them. So you have to, when you are an advisor, you have to find a source of learning for yourself too, so you don't become stale in the market. And to me, that source of learning is see what fails or succeeds for my client. Like I'm
Yeah.
very much involved in making sure that they get to the right level of impact. And I can only do it really in 6 to 12 month time frame, which some people will say, oh, well, why can't you just like make an impact within first 30 days? On a small scale, yes, we can. We can get better data instrumentation. We can get better conversion rate, but those are not big step function changes that I'm really going for when I'm taking on an advisory contract. And those evolutions to those step function changes take time.
Yeah, I think I agree with this, because the initial upwind that you have at the start of every kind of gig is sort of usually constrained to how their onboarding flow is,
Yeah.
because something is just broken in it. And you're just like, okay, like based on my experience, I would change this and that, but everybody can do this from the outside, like frankly speaking,
Yes.
right? Like, and also like giving support for their recruiting or whatever. That's not where my value is as
No.
well. And I think the value is materialized once you start to know the problems.
Right. And I would just add to that that in the first 3 months, you mostly you are anchoring on your historical experiences, and you
Yeah.
almost like copy and pasting it to the new environment. Versus after 3 months, you start to understand the new environment a lot better, and you start coming up with more local suggestions and authentic. So that's why like 3 months to me is a failure point. If you look at my LinkedIn, the 93-month engagement that I have, I consider it, they might still enjoy it and find it valuable. But for myself, I consider it as a failure because I just copy pasted. I didn't actually help them find a local
Okay.
solution, most likely. But I'm very hard on myself because my North Star metric is insights per minute. And although I can deliver them just from my previous past experiences, that's not what makes the biggest change and the biggest impact in the company,
No.
because they don't just match one to new business.
Okay, fair enough. So let's say it's insights per minutes for you. I'm a little bit skeptical about that one. It's a very good marketing catchphrase. I kind of love it because it's from you. It's fine. So it's okay. Let's just leave it
But I
there.
hear my clients say that. So that's why how it became because they say like you have the highest insights per minute on any meeting that I have in the week. So it's because they've classified me this way. I wait for that phrase, which is when I know I deliver value.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go with that. But like let's then spin it to interim. Like what kind of time frame would you say there is good? And when does it start to turn bad? Because you
Yes.
also need to kind of exit from an interim role.
Yes.
And that's
Oh
more
my
like
gosh. Yes.
that's more like the upper limit. So
There is a shelf life on the interim position that once you pass that shelf life, you need to get
go
out.
for it. What is your
Yeah.
shelf life, Elena? Is it 6 months or 9 months?
So first I'll say why I take on interim roles. I love advising. It's very strategical. I get to pick the companies that I work with. I get to work with incredible people. It really fuels my learning, but I'm also an operator at heart. So sometimes all of that coaching, I'm like, I want to do it. And I can shake the client and say, you need to do this. And they still say, I'm going to go this way. And I'm like, what are you doing? I can't handle it because I know exactly what you should be doing. And I know exactly the output that it's going to create, but it's their prerogative. It's their strategy. It's their company. I fully respect that and I have to live with it. But as an operator, I miss that player mode. I'm not ready to completely separate from it. So I take interim to scratch that operational itch. And I pick them very carefully. I pick them in order to unlock new industry for myself.
Mm-hmm.
For example, with Netlify, I picked it because founders were amazing, team was incredible, but it helped me dip into developer persona, which I didn't have a very intimate experience before. And it helped me understand the developer space so much more by being an executive in the company that focuses on developers. At Amplitude, I picked it because it was a sales-led company introducing PLG versus all of my other experiences were PLG introducing sales-led experiences. So it unlocked additional learnings for me. So I picked them very strategically. It's not just like anything comes through the door. There's a motive behind every single interim that I've taken, but it is helping. I love that operational role. It's just after a year, I burn out and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that it's coming to an end. It's over. But the shelf life of the interim level role, I think at the minimum, it's 6 months because you just can't make any impact that is noticeable usually under 6 months. And just remember that it's not just 6 months that you come in and then you come out. You need to create a succession plan for yourself.
Yeah.
So if you're doing it for 6 months, you really only have 1 month of work and 5 months of succession planning so you can either hire for your replacement to minimize the disruption or promote somebody to become your replacement. But it becomes a very succession heavy work right from the start. So 6 months to me is like a bare minimum. Ideally, it's more than a year, but year is a hard stop for me. A year is when you reaching expiration of the shelf life because as an executive, as an interim, you're there for short term. So although it's very helpful for you to make some big strategic decisions from the beginning or take in the strategy that the company has a hypothesis on and validate it, but you should not be making towards the end of your interim any big swings in decisions because that should be reserved for the next leader because you're not going to be there to actually see it through. It's like making a big strategic call and then saying, peace, I'm out. That would just be a shitty experience for both you and the company. So you make that first call, you operationalize it for a year, but then you need to bring somebody in. And if you're in this lame duck seat as an interim where you're not able to make any big decisions and you're just waiting for your tenure to expire, you should just get out as fast as possible or commit to a full-time to that position. So I would say that between 6 months and a year is a perfect timing. But at a year, you start to feel that I'm not effective anymore in this position.
Yeah, you start to feel yourself age. You look at yourself and you're like, what time is it? That's kind of happening. I have one exception to this kind of thing, and I'm not sure whether it's actually an interim or more of a contractor thing. What I used to do as well at some point, if you have extremely difficult hires, either because there is a shortage in the market or whatever. So, let's say we need to have a growth for a very, very specific domain. I don't know, let's take the most expensive, most difficult thing, head of growth with 50 years of career experience in AI and machine learning in the Eastern Hemisphere after 5 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
And these hires are extremely difficult, but you need someone to kind of bridge the gap. It can make sense to bring someone in interim, and then as soon, even if it's after 2 months, you found someone to kind of kick them out.
Yep.
Because I know from a personal experience that the biggest mistakes that I did, despite all the red flags that I should have seen, is I assumed that I have to hire someone because we were 4 months in the process, we couldn't find someone, and then we started to make compromises.
Absolutely.
And in that case, I actually say, bring in an interim, 1 or 2 months, it's totally fine. And then if you find something really good, someone that you really fall in love, that's worth every penny. Because at this point, you already mentioned you already wasted 4 months of budget, right?
So there are 3 modes in which companies should be considering interim. Number one is try before you buy an executive. It's a trial period for a person to validate that you are the right company for them to work in, and for you to validate that it's the right person. Hiring a bad executive is a really net negative exercise that affects companies for years to come and teams for years to come. So having an interim, I see a lot of times is becoming a way to hire full-time position, which is amazing. I'm hoping that more and more we become accustomed to it. So we have like this actually dating period with the company as opposed to just like signing on the dotted line and committing completely cold turkey after having like one meeting and meeting one time with the company. So it's a ramp to full time. Number two, it's this keep the bus moving. We're hiring for somebody, but I need somebody, like I need a throat to choke to keep the bus moving. And that's a great opportunity too, because it's like, hey, you get exposure to it, you get to learn something, and then you can help them also hire somebody in your replacement as well. And that's also a really, I think, fantastic interim level where there's sometimes they're not even sure who to hire. So interim helps them validate who they should be going after because they gives them a comparison point to do. And then the third mode, which is you want to hire somebody with a really deep level of expertise that you don't need for long term, but you need for this short change to increase the step function, and then you'll be able to hire somebody full time. But there's a difference between introducing something new versus completely operationalizing it. This is where I, by the way, fall. I introduce something new in the company, and then I hire for a completely different persona versus what they would hire for me from the beginning. And I help them prototype new strategy so they can make a better decision afterwards.
I have two sentences that I, for a second, considered to print on a t-shirt. The first one, a throat to choke, which sounds a bit dirty, so I don't think I should. And the other thing is, I'm a growth advisor. I introduce profit, and like as a concept. So, but like that's really good. Okay, so I think that's very interesting from the side of the employer. But let's go maybe one step back to the person who wants to be in a role like this. And I would love to also hear your take on, let's say we want to set this up, right? And let's say I'm starting to do some free mentoring on some of these platforms and so forth. And I feel like, okay, I like this. I see myself in the future being able to do this. Now, we have the situation, I also said this in the pre-talk, specifically in Europe, we have a lot of these clauses in the employer contracts that you are not allowed to do any consulting on the side. And this is not just like limited to direct competitors. Again, this is about to control people how much that they work for your company, because a lot of dinosaur companies still believe that only if you work 42.5 hours in a week while you're sitting in a chair, you're going to be profitable or, in some way kind of efficient. How do I get buy-in? How do you structure this? If you're new to this, if let's say you do a job change or like you have to convince your existing manager, how do I get this set up?
Yeah, so I'd start at the contract signing stage. So when you're taking a new position, read that contract because you can't change it. You do have power, especially when they extended you an offer they wanted. And if this is the clause that you're negotiating, they will change it. I do remember at Miro, we had the clause I didn't even know that clause was in the contract because I'm based in US, so I didn't even know that this thing existed. But that was part of the standard contract that went out to all of employees that I was hiring when I was CMO. And one woman, she's like, hey, I have the side gig and I want to continue doing it. And your contract prevents me from doing so. And I'm like, what? Like, I had no idea. Let's remove it. And like, I went to CEO to get his approval. He's like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care. I'm like, okay, removed it out. Off she goes. So you do have power to change that contract. So ask. You might be told no, and that's okay. At least you have it, but you can ask. As an existing employee, I think it's a little bit more complicated because you don't have as much leverage. But the question is do you have a supportive manager? I wouldn't keep this advising business on the hush hush. I would be very open with your manager if you can, because you actually want them to be supportive of it. And you don't want to come out as a surprise to them that you are working with another company, because that can erode trust in your relationship, and trust is super important here. So I would breeze it by them saying, hey, I want to explore in some consultancy agreements. It's going to be completely non-competitive. I'll run by the company by you before I sign it or before I even have a meeting. I'm not looking for another full-time role. This is just to increase learning, and it'll be done outside of working hours. So it's not like I'm going to come into work and at 9 a.m. I'm going to take my advisory call. Like, I will work around it, around my commitments. And if you see an impact negative on me, I want you to tell me so I will stop doing it, because full-time position is still my main focus. So if you have a supportive manager, and my manager at SurveyMonkey, she was very supportive of, she's like, yeah, I do this myself all the time. I love it. Go. Like, I'll send some clients your way if you want to. Like, I'll send people that are looking for advisory. I think you should absolutely do it. It will make you better. So, and I'm like, amazing. Like, I have somebody that I can even ask for advice on how to do it. You might not be so lucky to have such an incredible supportive manager. Manager maybe doesn't know, but do ask for permission on this. I don't think this is a forgiveness territory. I do think this is a permission. And if they told you no, you have to work within those bounds. And maybe on your next position, on your next employer, you can use that as one of the things that you talk to them during the offer negotiation process. But I would really prioritize your full-time position here first. You're not trying to
No.
lose it before you actually found your fit within advising world.
Yeah. And it takes time. It really takes time. I think the same mistake that we try to keep companies from, like to monetize too early before they are actually in the market with their free user acquisition, at least for B2C products, is exactly the same here. I have two things to add to this. And I think specifically, if you're an executive, you need to make sure, if you're in an early stage startup, that you are having this in the contract, that you're exposing your positions to the board. Because specifically for me, I have to show this to the board because I'm part of the funding story. So what is happening is, if your bigger VC funds are starting to write tickets, then they do run due diligence on everyone on the executive level. And you can be relatively fast on the executive level in a very small company. That's the first part where I would say that it sounds obvious and it sounds clear, but this is something that I also started to notice, right? Like, they run due diligence on you. And if you're upfront about this, and it's not about, oh, like, let's turn another stone, let's see what she's doing otherwise, you have to kind of make yourself sure on this side. The other thing is, I actually look at it in this way, that while this is a very amazing source of also additional income, I would say, if you had comparable jobs and one of them pays you 10,000 less, but you have someone that is extremely supportive in you doing something on the side, versus another job that pays you maybe 10 more, but it's a complete like 9 to 5 grind, whatever, take the first one. I'm really like, I know that not everybody has this opportunity and the current market conditions suck, but that was my experience as well. So I think, as usual, I agree with you to 95% because nothing is sure in life.
Yeah, I agree. And I do want to double down on the point about monetization. At the beginning, it should not be about income streams. At the beginning, it should be for you to find what else you can sell to the market outside of full-time engagement. Like, how else can you find demand for your expertise? And then you can test into monetization strategy with it. But don't think about it like, I have to close it at the highest rate, or I have to like make a meaningful stream out of it at the beginning. When you're holding your full-time role, that is where your money for rent, for food are coming from. This should be more of prototyping first, close your first couple of agreements, maybe have one that is even free at first, that like you're just prototyping the value delivery, then close it at just your regular full-time rate, just to test into it, and then start increasing rates. I started with charging less than $100 an hour, which was arguably like I think it was less than $50 an hour at the beginning. And now I've risen to make many multiples on top of it, but it was 10 years in the making. It's not like I went into my first contract and like $10,000, take it or leave it. No, it was more of like, let's see if I can actually be helpful to you first. And then when you create a belief of you have something that market wants, you can start learning how to monetize it. Don't start with monetization.
No, I think I agree with this. And also the interesting thing is you also learn from the inbound that you get on who finds you interesting, right? So like, and I think there's a very simple checklist that I use. if you constantly get a very specific industry reaching out to you, and I had some wild inbound, some really wild inbound, then you have to ask yourself, okay, why do they like you? Like, why do they approach you in the first place? What is the commonality that they have? And if you like advising companies like this because you find them fascinating, because Leah's fascinated about almost everything that's random, then go for it, right? And this kind of niching down in this kind of sub-growth market, let's call it that, is what in the end drives your rates upwards. And I think that's been my experience as well, for sure. Like there is a commonality between the people who do reach out into my inbound. If I don't
Yep.
like them, then I have a positioning problem because I'm
Right.
talking probably about something that does not make a lot of sense. But yeah, so
Or
far,
something
I
that you
think it
don't want
works.
to specialize in, which is
Yeah.
also a problem. Because you do bring up a really good point that we didn't really hit that I want to underline is that your full-time roles force you to be generalist. You're
Yeah.
a warm body that is just going to get all and any problems the company has, that it's your job to figure them out. There might be some specialty that like, oh, your skills are here and here, but overall you are generalist. That's what you're
No.
hired to do, to just solve the problems and evolve together with the company. However, as an advisor, being a generalist is will be your biggest friction point. Because, well, why would they want an advisor that is a generalist when they can just hire a generalist? Advisors, you don't want to also compete with full-time positions. So you have to let go of some of your general skill set and really focus and specialize. So find something that you love to do that you're better than everybody else at doing and create yourself as a positioning of that is my specialty. Yes, everything else comes along. Like I was a CMO, I ran products before, design teams, data teams, growth teams, but I like pull all of that apart and I said PLG in B2B in scaling stages. And that's it. And I pushed everything away. Can I do all of those things? And by the way, when I take an interim position, I flex all of those muscles too. But as an advisor, I go very much into, specialty.
I love this very much. What I do as well on top, which I never actually checked with you. So now you can tell me actually on the recording whether I'm doing a mistake here. I had some really good success, I think, in inventory calls when you talk about the customer fit, right? So, like, hey, is the problem that you're actually describing to me, is this something that I can help with? I usually find always something where I'm like unsure whether I do have the experience. And I make it always very, very transparent that I feel like, hey, by the way, in this particular, like, so let's say it's about regulations in the United States, about some very specific kind of area. I do point it out at the start and I say, look, I would be very excited to work on this, but just so you're aware, I don't have any experience in this particular part. Is this kind of
Yep.
okay? My experience has always been like, first of all, they're very glad. And then they say more something like, it's not a bug, it's actually a feature. And we want you to do it this way. And if they would not want it, then they're also glad that you kind of mention it.
Yes.
But this takes away a lot of the pressure from myself that I feel like, oh no, I don't know what to do. This is completely new to me. And I said, like, look, I laid it out there. They said they still want to work with me. So there must be something here. Let's go. Right. And I feel like this is very helpful.
I agree. I'll give an even more exaggerated example. When I was CMO at Miro, I'm running entire marketing team. Now, my specialty is growth marketing. So I'm like, growth marketing, I know. Website, all of the channels, let's go. But what about enterprise marketing? What about content marketing? Like I've never ran those teams. So I'm like, okay, what do I do? Like, do I just like pretend that I know it all? Or do I go and actually hire advisors for myself? And because I was put in this situation and they needed, by the way, CMO that was very heavily focused on growth marketing. That's why they hired me. So the rest of it, like CEO knew that that was not my experience. And then the first 3 months, I hired VP of marketing from HubSpot to help me with content strategy. So I equipped him with my direct report and I'm like, I'll listen in too because I'd love to learn, but please be her coach. So she doesn't rely on me because I don't know where I'm leading her in the strategy. And I also hired VP of marketing from Atlassian and VP of marketing from Dropbox. And I attached them to my enterprise marketing lead. And I'm like, help her because I'm also don't know where I'm going here. And well, Miro's CEO was extremely supportive of it because he was a big believer in advisors from the beginning. I mean, I was one of his first advisors too in the company, but I found it very empowering too because I didn't feel like I had to know it all. I could continue specializing in my specialty. I had an opportunity to learn. I knew it's not my superpower to run that enterprise marketing, to run those large content teams, but it's other people's. And this is where like this advising superpower really in specialty comes in because I can pick a company, I know their growth motion, I know who's successful at it, and bring them to my team to help them pattern match some of the historical knowledge that those people have without hiring them full time, which I wouldn't be
No.
able to afford them, nor did I have positions for them.
I think if I had to summarize all of this, like this entire hour that we already spoke, I just look at the time. It's a lot about pattern matching in some
Yes.
way or form, and then a monetization of that in various different forms. And
Yeah.
I think I can definitely say I would not be where I am right now without you. So you definitely know your shit when it comes to structuring this, pulling it up. And for me, it's been a liberation for sure. It's an amazing path, and I also encourage more people to do it. I think you're more on the positive side in terms of like, yeah, everybody can do this and everybody should do it. And
Their
I'm more on
local
the side.
version of this, absolutely. Their local
Okay.
version of it. And it
Yeah,
might take
okay.
them longer or shorter, but it's possible. Everything is possible. I don't
Hey,
know. I'm
this
an
is my
optimist that way.
podcast. This is my podcast. I could just cut this out and then just like
Fine, cut it off.
fine, just put words in my mouth. But yeah, I think it's a hard piece of work in some sense. But I think if you're also someone that loves working the way that we do with freedom and also like to be really focused on the outcomes, I think it is a very, very viable career choice that takes some time to get going as well, right? Of course,
Yes.
this is not just like from 0 to 1 in 2 days, but yeah. Elena, this was absolutely amazing. Who should contact you today, tomorrow, in the next month? How much time do you have left besides all the other 200 things that you're doing at the same time?
Can we not ask that on the podcast? I cannot handle any more contacts. I'm so oversubscribed. So follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on Substack, but
Yeah.
my schedule is, I'm constrained on hours for sure right now. On context switching, I should say. I'm constrained on context switching.
All right. Cool. I think this was not the last time that we've spoken, luckily, on the podcast. So I hope this was enjoyable for you too.
We'll do it
And
again.
I see you on the next one.
All right, awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to the ProducTea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.